Hello and welcome to another video. In this video, I'll be demonstrating how to construct a very basic seam called a plain seam with a backstitch. This is one of the first types of stitches you want to learn if you're a beginner at sewing. I've grabbed a few things around my house so I can show you what a plain seam looks like. So here I have a pillowcase that I've turned inside out, and if I look at it and analyze it, I can see there are two rows of plain seams all around this pillowcase, joining the front and the back pieces of the pillowcase together. And that's what plain seams are used for. They're used to join two pieces of fabric together. And here I have a shirt, and if I look inside the shirt, I can see that the back and the sides are joined together with a plain seam. So if I analyze the shirt, you can clearly see there are plain seams all over the shirt, not just on the side, but on the collar, on the lapel, on the hem. And then here I have a shopping bag. And as you can see, the shopping bag also uses a plain seam. This entire bag is constructed using only a plain seam all over the bag. So to construct the sample, I'm using two pieces of woven fabric. Clearly you can see there's no stretch. And I've cut the edges using pinking shears so these edges don't fray. Woven fabrics usually require some type of a seam finish so that they don't fray on the edges. This is one way to finish a seam, is to use pinking shears. So what I'm going to do is I like to use these samples as a reference to go back and look at, and you can follow along and do the same. Grab a sheet of paper, write down the name of the sample, and when you're finished, you'll put the sample on the sheet of paper, and you can put it in a binder or something and use it as a reference to go back and look at. I would also add some notes to help you remember any details you think you might want to remember about the sample. So here I'm going to go ahead and mark my two pieces with a W and an R, W meaning the wrong side and an R for the right side. Because my fabric looks the same on both sides, I can't really tell what the right side and wrong side look like. So to construct the seam, we will face the right sides together. Next, I'm going to go ahead and use my clear ruler to mark 1/2 inch from the edge of this fabric for a 1/2 inch seam allowance. That's how far from the edge I want to stitch this seam. Most commercial garments require a 5/8 seam allowance, but for the purpose of this sample, I'm only going to use a 1/2 inch. Next, I'm pinning these two together, and then I'll head over to my sewing machine and start stitching. Okay, before I start stitching this, let's go over our settings on the sewing machine. Two things you want to check. You want to check that your stitch length is about 2.5 to 3. I've got mine set at 2.5. The second thing you want to check is the tension. Most sewing machines, the default tension is set between 4 and 5. You can go ahead and leave that at the default. Now, before I start stitching, anytime you're sewing a garment, you want to make sure you do a test run of the fabric. If the fabric puckers, you might need to lower the tension. If there are loose loops when you look at the stitch, you might need to increase the tension slightly. So make sure you adjust your settings as needed before you sew garments. As you can see, my machine has these guidelines, as do a lot of machines, and I can line up the edge of my fabric with that guideline so I know that I'm sewing at the correct seam allowance. And as you stitch, just make sure you don't pull or stretch the fabric. Let the machine guide the fabric naturally. All you're doing is placing your hand on the fabric and making sure it stays in line with that guideline. So now I'm just going to start stitching, probably about just a few stitches. Now I'm going to reverse. There we go. And then I'm going to go ahead and stitch all the way to the end of this. When I get to the end, I'm also going to back stitch. Now I'm back stitching again. And now I've got a back stitch in the beginning and end of the seam. Okay, now to finish the sample, make sure you cut off any extra threads and you press the seam open. The pressing is what gives it the nice, beautiful, clean, professional look, so don't forget to press your seams. For any garment, anytime you're sewing, pressing is the final touch that really adds that beautiful, finished, professional look. So always stitch, press. Make sure you maintain that habit. All right, so this completes the sample. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. See you in the next episode.